Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the C-Masc show with me, Timothy Gordon, Dr. Michael Robillard, and Elliot Hulse. You know who we are by now, and today we are talking about the perceived conflict between science and religion, and why there is in reality no conflict, although there is a conflict between two metaphysical worldviews, not science and religion, but scientism and religion. But before we get into some of the terminology and the history of this, guys, what are your encounters with people on this topic typically? Because I'll notice sometimes people will say things like, what? Religion? Nowadays? Seriously? Evolution did it, bro. Like, why do you care anymore? Evolution did it all.
Yeah, me and Mike addressed this in the Don't Go to College book. The average plebe, for lack of a better term, in 2023 has never before said what they say. This is an unparalleled time for the plebe thinking that the patrician way to think about things is materialist, reductionist, determinist, atheist. This has never before happened. It was always the plebes that held to some folk religion, whether the one true one or one of the many fake ones. So it's a staggering time to be alive because the plebes are the one at home watching Real Time with Bill Maher or whatever it is, and he's telling them atheism and reductionism, materialism is the correct world philosophy. So it's a really funny time to be a knowledgeable Christian.
Yeah, it's taken a long time to really filter down to that level because if you go back a few centuries, some of these ideas are very much present among the intellectual elite. But like you say, not for the common man. But Mike, don't you think that now people don't talk coherently, as if those beliefs that Tim's outlined are actually true? So materialism, for example, would entail that there's no kind of purpose, meaning, value, and yet people want to say things like being homophobic is wrong, or we should do this, or that, or the other. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, you'll see this toggling back and forth all the time. I mean, particularly with the new atheist folks, that we've talked about before, Dawkins, Hitchens, Dennett, and Harris, and it's the toggling that it took me a while to actually see it myself or hear it myself. When I was sort of parroting it, but like they'll help themselves to material reductionism one moment to knock down Christianity, then the very next moment, yeah, they'll be saying like these like thick normative claims about we all lives matter. We have to be vegans. Like don't you think about like the justice with respect to this movement or that moment, and it's just like where's this normativity bubbling back up into, and you can hear Harris as an entire terrible book, The Normative Landscape, trying to bootstrap morality from neuroscience. Dawkins says that it would be unevolutionary of us to not be vegan, so therefore we ought to be vegan because therefore evolution evolution mandates it. And Dennett has a whole TED talk on how radical jihadism is a very dangerous meme, and dangerous is just being the fill-in for immoral. Gad Saad and the parasitic mind. Oh, we gotta look out for like parasitic, pathogenic ideas. Okay, so that then he's just slipping the normativity in that way. So all these folks, new and old, yeah, they're guilty of that very same thing. They'll help themselves in materialism and evolution one moment, and then they'll reach into the magic hat and they'll pull out their favorite normative theory. Oh, what do we have in here? Okay, I guess I'll be a vegan. Evolution says veganism. Yeah, you say so.
Yeah, and they'll also not only sneak that in, but Dennett will talk about things like Mother Nature's purpose, and you
Yep.
still get the language of teleology and final causality, even though that's the very thing that they claim that Darwin did away with. And they'll talk about what your eyes are for or what your heart is for example, as if there's some purpose to it.
Selfish genes trying to you know achieve their own teleological ends. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And it comes back to that point that I mentioned that struck me really hard in a introduction to Pascal by T.S. Eliot, when he said that the average unbeliever is just someone who's failed to think things through to a conclusion. So many of the people who are parroting the ideas that they hear as fashionable from secular academia haven't really thought about what would that look like consistently, even to be honest, whether you can even have rationality at all. And the more sophisticated and insane materialists will just deny that there is any such thing as human rationality. And we'll come on to this in a second with the fact that the church, in principle, is fine with the evolutionary origin of the body. Not that it's been proven beyond reasonable doubt by science, properly speaking, but in principle, fine. It could have arisen by purely evolutionary processes. But the soul, the fact that human beings have an intellect and then possess the power of rationality, which no other animals do, that in principle can't have arisen via purely material processes. We'll get into why later. Elliot, have you had any encounters with people saying that somehow religion is completely ridiculous now because of science?
Well, I just want to just assert that what you said before in terms of laziness, intellectual laziness, and arrogance is at the root of what most of this is. But I think we're getting closer to being able to accept it as, secular people, with all the AI and robots that we got going on, right? And so I think an easy way for people to understand it is, hey, look, we're creating, Chat GPT. You guys were talking about when you came on here, creating all kinds of human-like technology, right? Robots, artificial intelligence. I don't think anybody would argue that no matter how much we pour ourselves into creating human-like technology, that will never actually ever be a human. No robot, no matter how technologically sound it is made, will ever truly understand what it's like to be a human. In other words, I'm saying that the creation can never really be like and understand the creator. And so, in the same way that a robot or artificial intelligence can never truly understand the mind of a human being such that it could create a human being, is the same way that we do not understand our creator. The creation is always less than the creator, even though it may bear some of the imprint of the creator, and that's what we are right now. So I think it's arrogant to believe that we could somehow deduce rationally what God is, or if God exists, or what God's all about from our lowly state. We're just too small. Some things just remain a mystery, as the human condition will remain a mystery to robots. The creator, the mystery of the creator, will always remain a mystery in many regards. Thankfully, we do have a God that shows himself and reveals himself to us, but at the same time, we'll never understand.
That's a really important point, that for our finite minds to grasp the infinite mind of God in its totality is something that can't happen. And it's a mystery in that sense, in that it's too much for us to grasp. But there is a difference between, say, a robot being unable to understand things rationally, just does what it's programmed, and then human beings who are made in the image of God. So we are similar to our creator in that we have the capacity to understand things. And that's the next point I want to get onto, which is why science is even possible. And the amazing historical fact that science everywhere else apart from the Christian West basically suffered a stillbirth. It never really got going. It was within the Judeo-Christian womb that science was really nourished and came to full fruition. So, any thoughts about why that might be? Let's say we're thinking about the Far East, where the world is seen as like a veil of illusion. And there's something insubstantial, even unreal about it. Why might that not be a really good starting point for the whole scientific endeavor? What is it about the Christian view of the world as logos, as ordered, and human beings as rational that means science really belongs to that kind of way of looking at things? Tim, any thoughts on that?
Aristotelian hylomorphism is the reason that the Christian West alone can sustain a worldview of good science and did begin to cultivate a worldview and a world comprised of good science. Now, it's really, really important that folks understand that hylomorphism means that the material is informed by form, that the material cause of anything, a physical object, a living thing, or an event also has a material cause, is informed by a formal cause, and it's imbued with a final cause, a purpose. I just want to take you guys back half a second to what Mike was saying in his answer earlier. The reason that Cornel West shouldn't be able to, in the name of self-consistency, bootstrap on to his material reductionist worldview is precisely this. If the world is without a creator, and as Descartes and Bacon said in the 16th and 17th centuries, there should be no formal or final cause considered by intelligent people from universities, then everything that exists in the world is a series of accidents, including an accidental beginning that's not a creation. What folks need to understand about Aristotelian hylomorphism is that an accident, whether we're talking about the accident that happens when you trip down the stairs or the accident that constitutes Dennett and Dawkins' view of the genesis of the world, an accident lacks a formal and a final cause. So it should suit them, because this is precisely what the Enlightenment thinkers and the post-Enlightenment thinkers have envisioned for the last 400 years, is get rid of the two most important causes: formal cause, the thing's intelligibility, and its final cause, its purpose. But then, like Mike said, they're constantly trying to bootstrap back on to the world, because it's necessary to even make a rational point about a thing, a person's vision. Its eyes. What are your eyes for? What is your gastrointestinal system for? This implies teleology, the same teleology literally that they denied by saying the creation of the world, the origin of species, the cosmology that has now become popular, quantum mechanics, all of it. For them, the popular atheists, who are absolute illiterates, by the way, is predicated on a lack of formal cause and final cause, formlessness and de-teleology. So they literally can't say what are eyes for if they want to be self-consistent. They literally can't say what is the gastrointestinal system for. And they wind up talking like mystics. The universe wired up by itself, by accident, incredible mysteries that seem to have a telos, a goal, but don't. And that's what their atheistic iteration of evolution has done. Conversely, Aristotelian hylomorphism explains everything. The intelligibility, the apprehendability, the cognizability of a thing is explained by not just its material parts, its material cause, but its form. So a Christian, more specifically a Catholic, who's really the Christian Aristotelian, can explain everything in the world, because unlike everyone over the last 400 years, we have not very, very determinedly left behind formal and final causation in Aristotelian hylomorphism.
So one way to think about scientism then, as distinct from science, is simply a way of looking at the world that wasn't established by science, but just began with the assumption that there is no final causality, there is no teleology or purpose, and that's the only legitimate way to look at things. But because it really is a feature of reality, it winds up having to constantly resort to that kind of language that it shouldn't really be allowed to help itself to, which is what Mike was saying.
Yeah. Yeah, that's precisely what scientism is. I mean, literally in our book, Don't Go to College, we trace Descartes, Francis Descartes, Rene Descartes, and Francis Bacon, who are supposed to be philosophical, epistemological rivals. One's a rationalist, one's an empiricist. This contradicts the very heart of the story of philosophy, that they would be agreeing about so large a precept. They both agree modernity should be based on the rejection of two of Aristotle's four causes, formal and final cause. They leave material and efficient cause around. And the most basic way to explain the absurdity of what these clowns have tried to carry off is this. What are the four causes? Well, if we're talking about the construction of a house, its material causes the all of the materials that it's built from. The night before the house is erected, let's pretend all the materials for building the house are there: the glass, the plaster, everything, the shingles. The efficient cause is going to be the work being done. The worker's arm counts, as well as the working processes that are taken, the hammering, the sawing, etc. So the scientism world of the post-Enlightened, post-Cartesian, post-Baconian Enlightenment has attempted to carry off all explanations, philosophical, religious, anti-religious, and scientific, with just these two causes alone. But the real way the house gets built is with the formal and the final cause. The formal cause is the blueprint that, of course, is there in the master builder's mind. He sees the intelligible house that he wants to use to make these material causes, the matters, using the efficient cause into what will be the final cause, right? The final cause of the house is well living in this thing, but to make it look like this blueprint in the formal cause. And without those two most important of the causes, obviously nothing can happen that is not an accident. An accident lacks a formal cause. If you trip down the stairs, there's nothing intelligible about it. It's only an action by kind of equivocal use of terminology. What did you do today? Let's say it's the first thing you did. You tripped on the way to the bathroom. That's not a real action by Aristotle's measures, because it was not, intent specifies form, as Thomas Aquinas always says. So when we're talking about an act, which is a mixture of form and matter, you have to have intended to do something, and then you go do it on the materia circa quam, right? The actual matter, the material cause. Well, if you trip down the stairs, that lacks a form. That's what is at odds, at the heart of what all these atheists are saying. They're saying that everything that happens is an accident, but then they want to help themselves to the notions of formal and final cause, just because Bill Maher and all of his audience don't understand the absurdity of what they're saying. You can't pull that off. You can't talk using nothing but the minutiae in the landscape of accident to formal and final causational terminology. But no one notices because no one's educated anymore, because they've all been educated in the post-Enlightenment university.
Well, that's a great outline of the four causes, and the way you put it there, you can see how ridiculous it is, basically trying to reduce the whole of reality to material and efficient causation. The other funny contradiction is that they can't give any account of how science is really possible, because even if we take the idea that science is the only field interested in truth and which is capable of rationally assessing beliefs, well, which scientific experiment established that? Who's the scientist that proved that one scientifically? Mike, that's another contradiction, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean that's the fatal flaw with the entire logical positivist project, right? Is that if we're trying to account for all truth claims, moral, religious, metaphysical, as being only true if they're empirically verified, then the truth of that claim is not of the set of things that are empirically verified. So the whole project collapses. William Lane Craig has a good debate you can find on YouTube where he goes about saying, someone says, like, I forget who he's debating, but he says, uh, don't you believe science, covers everything? And he's like, no. And he's like, what could it not, cover? And he's like, I don't know, off the top of my head, let's think. Mathematical and logical truths, metaphysical assumptions about mind and mentality, other minds, the historical record of other minds coming to consensus about a scientific, claim, fairness, moral truths, aesthetic truths, and science itself, right? The truth of science itself. That all of these things are have to hang upon a set of a priori presuppositions that are not empirical in any sense. So until you can't even get science off the ground until you assume those background conditions or assumptions, many of which, as Tim has mentioned, are diminished because they've stripped out the final and formal causality. But yeah, all that is just baked into the cake in most present debates on, like, Bill Maher or Gad Saad saying something on Twitter. Like, that's where the conversation starts, and what we're trying to do is back up and say, look, here are the tacit presuppositions that are being assumed prior to those claims.
Yeah, right.
Add to that list of empirically unjustifiable principles: the principle of induction, the principle of deduction, the principle of the excluded middle, the principle of non-contradiction, and the principle of causality itself. They can do nothing. It can do nothing.
Yeah. No, yeah. You're not going to find any of those things under a microscope somewhere.
No.
The laws of logic will just fall out of a tree and hit you on the head, and you'll say, "I've discovered them."
Human rights, so it will be distilled in a lab somewhere, right? According to these measurements, it turns out feminism is true. Like, your dad's Watson.
Cornell West, Mr. Science, crazy hair science man. Yeah, according to these beakers and these bright colored fluids.
Yes, of course. More
LGBT.
More money to Syria because the science says so.
Yeah. But non-normative, but normative.
No, yeah, you dummies. Morality doesn't exist. No.
But give more money to Syria. But give more money to
you moral monster. Yeah.
Yeah, people don't get it. People, if you are out there if you're weighing in the balance atheistic claims by these clowns, they're clowns. They're fucking clowns. There's no joke about it. There is contradiction in everything they say, and not one of their claims gets off the ground. Their serious claims against Christianity or theism writ large gets off the ground.
If they were the one that's like minimally consistent is Dennett. Dennett at least understands what's really at stake with his atheist reductionism, and then he just tries to eliminate everything. He goes, morality's I'm going to debunk morality. Oh wait, there's still minds. I got to eliminate minds. Then intentionality. Okay, I'm an eliminativist about intentionality. So he's trying to just sweep, his entire career is just trying to sweep all the evidence of God underneath the rug. So it starts with religion, then morality, then minds, then intentionality. And he's like, I don't exist. There's no such things as persons. But I'll give a TED talk about all these things that I care about. But he's at least, like, I think the most consistent, trying to just get everything under the rug. Like, don't look under the rug. This is nothing to look at here.
Yeah, Dennett makes a wholehearted attempt to be epistemically self-consistent the way Nietzsche made a wholehearted attempt to be morally self-consistent about his atheism. I'll say that much.
Mm-hmm.
The point on Nietzsche there, Tim. He was more sophisticated than the modern new atheists because he had the insight correctly that there's no such thing as science without any presuppositions. He says a philosophy of faith must always be there first. It is a metaphysical faith that underlies our faith in science. Now, materialists hate that word faith because they fantasize that they can somehow do without it. But all the things that you and Mike have just listed, whether it's the existence of numbers, laws of logic, that the senses are reliable, that the universe is ordered in such a way that the mind can know it, etc., etc. These are all things that can be metaphysically grounded on the worldview of classical theism, but not on the atheist materialist worldview. They've got no way to account for them or establish them empirically.
Correct.
So,
Absolutely.
So this is why Stanley Jackie's book, Science and the Road to God, he makes that claim that it was only within the Christian West that science was born. Everywhere else, it was stillborn. He lists Arabic, Babylonian, Chinese, Egyptian, Greek, Hindu, and Mayan cultures and describes it as a stillbirth everywhere else except the Christian West. And most of the founders of modern science were deeply religious men. Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler, Newton, Kelvin, Maxwell, etc. The list can go on and on. And the Bible really cleared the ground for science because it depersonalized or desacralized nature. So the Old Testament in the Book of Wisdom says that God has ordered everything with number, weight, and measure. So what we expect to find when we investigate then is exactly that. Cosmos, because it's rationally ordered. So this is almost like an invitation to the human mind, which can detect patterns, understand them, etc., to see the book of nature as revealing the author, God. And that's what many scientists have understood the whole project as being about, coming to understand the rationality and beauty of it all. And that's the next point I want to bring up about the laws of physics. So the amazing thing is not just that there are laws, but that they are the way they are, and that there's elegance, symmetry, harmony, and beauty to them. And if you listen to some of the theistic scientists who were at one point atheists, they'll say things like, well, it was the fact that I could tell which mathematical equation was going to be the correct one, merely from which was the most beautiful or harmonious. And why should that be the case? So science is a kind of investigation of the beauty of the world.
Yeah, and as we move further and further away from God, we get uglier and uglier. Just look at the art of the Middle Ages, and look at the art today, where there is no God, there is no beauty.
Yeah, science is the discovery of the beautiful way in which the cosmos has been patterned, and that we can investigate it. How come, though, human beings are capable of this? Why can we know things like 3 plus 3 is 6 in all possible universes, not just our own? Why can we know that some truths are true of necessity? Why can we grasp that the laws of logic are also true in all possible worlds? Doesn't seem like the kind of thing that a creature who's just been cobbled together by purely materialistic processes would be able to grasp or have any need of just for mere survival value. It's a bit like a cheetah, for example, if it was able to sprint at 1,000,000 miles an hour, but the gazelle only goes 70 or 80. I mean, what's the survival value of being able to go 1,000,000? It's so far beyond what's necessary, and yet we can do all this. Tim, what is it about the human mind that makes it not just different in degree, but in kind from, say, a dolphin or a chimp? Because some people now, they think there's no real difference between human beings and other animals.
Well, it's our specific difference. Rationality is the human specific difference. And for those of you out there who haven't studied Aquinas, genus means we are animal, just like the scientists say we are animals, right? But we are the rational animal. Rationality is our specific difference for Thomas Aquinas and for Plato, Aristotle, Boethius, Augustine, Thomas, Bellarmine, take your pick. All of these Catholic post-Aristotelians down through the 2 millennia agree that we are an animal, that's our genus, but our species is the rational animal, which means that our specific difference, that which sets us as a species of the genus apart from other species of the genus animal, is our reason. And let's stick with your mathematical proposition, Will. 3 plus 3 is 6. This is true, and it always must be true because it's cognizable by the human intellect. Ratio is adequated to intellectus in the incredibly complex, let's call it, for the sake of an hour podcast, ineffable processes that go into real or quasi-realism, which would be Aristotle and Thomas, in terms of the input-output machine of the human mind. 3 plus 3 equals 6. And we can do that because we are the rational animal, and no other animals can do it, no matter how much Dennett and Dawkins want them to be able to. So you have to talk about, as a good Aristotelian scientist, you just have to talk about a thing's genus and its species. There is no other animal that could perform this simple equation. Even chimps, Jane Goodall be damned. I'm sorry to disappoint everyone, but even the smartest animals, chimpanzees or pigs or dolphins, they can't come close. As a matter of fact, I told my kid this the other day because my Aristotle professor, my PhD program, told us this. They asked, "Hey, Dad, wouldn't it be cool if a dog started talking?" Because we were watching the old Disney movie, The Shaggy Dog. And I said, if your dog started talking to you, he would be human. Because speech and risibility, the ability to laugh, follow upon, they're what's called, they're the highest of the 3 types of accident. They're formal accidents, proper accidents. And they run with 100% of the time reason. So even though speech, laughter are not our specific difference, they are unique to animals who are rational animals, human beings. And only human beings possess them too, like reason. So if your dog started talking, it would be human. This should be proof enough for the plebes out there that don't want to go get a PhD in philosophy. They ought to be able to accept this because it conforms to what we know about the world. Human beings alone can reason. Human beings alone can speak. Human beings alone can laugh. And yet, this is what's ironic. This is why it was my first point out of the box this morning. It's so odd what the plebes have done over the last 3 millennia. If you look at human history, particularly the history of the Roman empires, they tended to get the simple things right, whereas academics would confound them and muck them up. And here they've actually, because I think of the internet, popularization of mass media, they've started to parrot what the intelligentsia say. And so everyone has it wrong, aside from a few Christian intellectuals on some dusty Friday morning podcast, right? You get 4 guys and a handful of other guys, maybe in the academy, that are saying, no, the plebes would have had it right if they hadn't have listened to the professor class, the sickly, priestly, mendicant order of professors that get everything wrong by saying stuff that doesn't make sense. It makes sense to stick with your common reason, with your common gut feeling about, yeah, human beings are anointed. We're set aside. We alone can speak and reason. And they have to come up with nonsense like animal altruism to cover the spread. But if you push on it hard at all, it just ends up turning up the uniqueness of the human specific difference more and more.
Yeah, you're right, Tim. Yeah, they have to you'll just see folks like Singer and his acolytes. They'll have to they'll just fight like crazy to vindicate these like marginal case examples, to be like, well, there is no difference in kind between a human being and whatever the Lucy, the sign language chimpanzee. It's just a matter of degree, and like they have to run this Sorites paradox in that space in order to confound people, and people go, oh yeah, you're right, yeah, there is no difference in kind really when you think about it. Then evolutionarily this just material account of evolution of just mere accidents just begets this being that can think and comprehend and think about things like abstract numbers and logic and God. It's just complexity, emergence, right? They'll just smuggle in some sort of like weasel word that is this explanatory gap filler, which does nothing in terms of explanation. But then we just say accidents, therefore totally new emergent property that's superior to all those accidents, that's different in kind from all those accidents, because of
Right.
complexity. And it's it's so terrible when you think about it. But when they have a monopoly upon the funding, the universities, the degree accreditation systems, the journals, right? And you're just immersed in these waters of materialist reductionism. It's tough to get out of it. It's very tough to get out of it when you're an undergrad or a grad student and you're stuck in it.
Yeah.
Conveniently, but not convenient for them, they never managed to get a dog or a cat to come and argue the case for them. Like,
Yeah.
just go and get your cat to come and use its powers of syntactical speech and conceptual thought to come and argue with me. Why are you doing it for it? Just bring the cat.
Yeah.
Don't believe me. Believe your lying eyes, right? Or in this case, I guess you have to run it in reverse order. Like, bro, no one would love to see this more. Aside from my little girl Charlotte, who's obsessed with animals, no one would love to see it more than yours truly here. If your dog can come up here and run even a basic pre-algebra problem on the chalkboard, just like sign me up. I'll pay big money for that ticket, and then we can have a talk about animal rationality. Have your dog, send me a Valentine, and then we can talk about animal altruism. But don't do it on his behalf. I got to see proof of purchase.
That's it.
And I won't.
What's your dog's favorite novel? What does he think of Dostoevsky?
Yeah, he hates it. Yeah.
So we're mocking it a little bit. We're mocking it a little bit because you can reduce it to absurdity. And we started a while back with the point that the materialists who try to be consistent will just say they aren't rational because it doesn't fit their worldview. They'll just say, fine, I'm not rational then. Just like they'll say, fine, there is no free will. And yet they'll still try to talk to you, to try to convince you using reasons why you shouldn't be religious, you should accept materialism. Again, inconsistent. Elliot, was there ever a point when you were growing up, coming through school, where you were tempted by this way of looking at things? And if so, how did you come out of it? Were you ever under the spell that you're just an animal like any other?
Yeah, it's interesting. My path was one of self-discovery, being a mixed race man living in New York where everyone had their place. You had Asians and Haitians and Jamaicans and Puerto Ricans and Irish, and being someone that didn't fit in well with any of those categories, one of the questions that was often asked of me was, Elliot, what are you? Right. And so it sounds like a simple question, but to me, it was existential. And so at a very young age, I began pondering this question, what am I? And my way to faith was through science. I came into the work of Rollo May, I believe his name was, and he wrote a book basically titled, What Are You Really? And through that, I came to discover that I was far more than just this bag of bones and hair and water and teeth, that I had a soul. Now, of course, he was a philosopher and he drew heavily on quantum physics, but it was through my adoption of the ideas proposed by quantum physics that at a very early age, I must have been about 12 or 13 years old, I was confident that I have a soul and that I'm God. And it was all through probably, the most narcissistic question that that rests on all of our hearts, which is, what am I? And if we really are honest in our inquiry, you can't help but to arrive at a place where you realize that, yes, I am more than the color of my skin. I'm more than my flesh and bones.
A lot of people have found that, I think, as science has advanced. Ironically, there have been a few plot twists in the materialist account of it that have actually lent more support to the religious worldview. And if we just start with probably the most famous one, the Big Bang, like, what did this look like to religious believers? In the beginning, God created the heavens and earth. Now, materialism had long held the doctrine of the eternity of matter, that it was just always there. And Tim, I think it's correct, isn't it, that Aquinas didn't think that you could prove whether the universe had a temporal beginning. He wasn't interested in that kind of causality. But because it's contingent, i.e., it could have been otherwise, it doesn't explain itself. He was interested in what keeps it in existence right now. What's the underlying cause, as in like a hierarchy of causes, not just a domino chain. And he thought you could prove that.
Yep. It's a short little Thomistic text. I have been through it in grad school on the eternality of the universe. Thomas struggles through Augustine's position. Augustine gives the analogy that the chronological primacy of God before the universe is like a foot sitting in a footprint in dust that was always there. It's ontologically prior, so it's still causing the footprint. But maybe if it were a chronologically infinite beginning to the universe, which they thought even in Aquinas' day, even in Augustine's day, it would still be ontologically prior. So that's actually the precept for Christians, for both Augustine and Aquinas, our common doctor, number one, Aquinas, and then our clear number two, Augustine. They both agreed that all that was necessary as a Christian precept in terms of the deogenesis of the universe was an ontological primacy of God over the universe, not necessarily a chronological primacy. Now, so set that aside in your mind. Both Augustine and Aquinas have that as the kind of precept. But as a matter of fact, the science in the early 1920s, being heralded by Einstein, he said, look, I'm going to prove that the universe is eternal. And he thought that would be a big score for atheists. And he's writing about this in even popular magazines and things in the 1920s. And he said, definitely, if the universe had a discrete beginning in time, and there wasn't this steady state model, which was the popular atheist model for the eternality of the universe. If there's a discrete beginning in time, that proves God. All the atheists, from Democritus in ancient Greece up through Einstein's day, had always held that. And then, of course, his follower, Monsignor, the Catholic Monsignor, who actually ended up proving, in some sense, Big Bang, showed Einstein the mistake he'd made, the fudge factor, famously. And it does prove, at the very least, that there's a discrete beginning to the universe and time. And scientific journals rejected it here in the West. Stalin and Mao were putting people to death because scientists in Soviet Russia and in China for mentioning Big Bang Theory because it was so dispositive of Christianity. But here in the West, they just ignored it for 40 years until it became what they consider to be undeniable. And then they said, okay, well, then we'll just commandeer Big Bang Theory. So it was 35 years before the 1960s when the left in the West and the left in the East finally admitted, all right, we'll just use this and we'll just move the goalposts from, if the universe had a beginning, discrete beginning in time, there must have been a creator, to now we'll just domesticate it in the reductionist determinist way, and we'll just say it was an accidental beginning in time. They just started creating that narrative right around 1965, 1970. And now, again, the plebes, even the Christian plebes, believe that Monsignor Lemaitre, who was a Catholic priest, his Big Bang Theory is a strike against Christianity. It makes no sense. I'd also like to, before we move off the topic too much, like to say something to quantum mechanics, whose main expositor, Max Planck, is a great theist. There's the number one man in the world who can explain quantum mechanics is a Dominican doctor of philosophy, and his name is William Wallace. And he can explain these two things only in terms of each other. Quantum mechanics, which is like you have to have a PhD, and very few PhDs in physics even understand it, and the Thomistic composition metaphysics of esse, essence, act, and potency. This is the only rational account of quantum mechanics I've ever seen, is the work of Father William Wallace, who's now deceased. And it's amazing stuff, and it will make you into not only a Christian, but specifically a Thomist Catholic Christian if you read the works of William Wallace. By the way, the Chinese and the Soviets in the early 20th century were, you guessed it, putting guys like Boris Hessian, a cosmologist, to death for mentioning quantum mechanics too. Also, they put to death, these same two totalitarian atheist regimes would put to death Mendelian geneticists, because Mendelian genetics, also a Catholic, Gregor Mendel, proved that man's first loyalty was to the family, not to the state. And the atheists all viewed these three big scientific theories of the last 140 years as proofs of Christianity. So I don't understand why Christians and non-Christians today alike gainsay the proposition. Makes no sense.
Mike?
Can I just just a thought on that? Tim and I touch on this in the book, but I think something really needs to be pointed out here, how it is that, the atheist rationalist scientist paradigm, it's heralded in the West, or the modern West now, as the supreme exemplar of rationality, right? We've kicked the traditional paradigm away. We've kicked Christian Aristotelianism away. And now we have, modernist scientism will be the gold standard for rationality. And then what do you see happen? You see, instances in Nazi Germany, Maoist China, Stalinist Russia, of the politicization of science and scientism. And what are you seeing now? You're seeing woke scientism, woke STEM, right? So once you cleave away, as Tim pointed out, once you cleave away from final and formal causality within your scientific paradigm, well, what fills the gap? Well, at this point, pregnant men, apparently. Right, so the supremely rational science suddenly becomes handmaiden to whatever the social or political ideology is at the time, and we're seeing it now. So these people that they presume, or they herald themselves as the exemplars of supreme rationality, and then they get steamrolled by politics, and then they're jumping whenever the political theory says how high to jump.
Mike, careful when you say fill the void and pregnant men in the same sentence. It's gross.
Ooh, that's that's a ghastly image. Yeah, no thanks.
That's a really important point, though, Mike. Whether theism is the only worldview that really makes science work, and if they're rejecting things like final causality, the principle of causality itself, like Hume did, we can't ever really know that the reason that the wood is burning is because the fire is burning it. Whether they can consistently reject causality and keep science seems like they can't. But if you do accept that causality is a real thing, then you've got the causal arguments for God as well. So the two things are going to stand or fall together. Fazer has a good line on that. Can a Humean consistently accept science and yet reject first cause arguments for the existence of God? Seems to be that he can't. So that's one of the problems that they're stuck with. And Yeah, Tim.
And Hume famously is known for having said, yeah, it's such a puzzle to me that I can't explain causality when I'm in my study, but then I go and I play backgammon and drink ale with my friends, and it's as if the world just hangs together, and I don't worry myself with these problems anymore. I just can't put it together. It's just like, well, yeah, maybe I don't know. Like, he just does it. He can't because he's unwilling to go further back to figure out what's making causality possible.
But that unwillingness that Tim was talking about there as well, with people being put to death for advancing scientific ideas that people were unwilling to hear. That was one of the reasons why the Big Bang wasn't accepted sooner, and they were open about admitting this. So Andre Linde, the cosmologist, he said that the non-stationary character of the Big Bang theory, based on the Friedman cosmological models, seemed very unpleasant to many scientists in the 1950s. And it's not because we've got some kind of scientific unpleasantness about it. The evidence for it is really good by that stage. It's that metaphysically it's unpleasant. They don't like the fact that it looks like what Genesis describes. And Tim was saying how in the 60s, 70s, it was domesticated and they tried to say, you know what, this supports our worldview after all. But up until 1959, there was a big survey of the top American astronomers and physicists. 2/3 of them still believed the universe had no beginning, even though there was strong scientific evidence that, in fact, it did have a beginning. They weren't willing to accept it. And now what you'll find is some will say, on the one hand, well, we only like things that can be empirically proven. And yet they'll say things like, well, the universe looks like it's fine-tuned for life, the so-called anthropic coincidences. And yet I guess we can explain that away with an in principle empirically unobservable multiverse. Or maybe there was an infinite series of big bangs and collapses before the big bang that started our universe. And they got no problem with it being empirically unverifiable then. They like that.
The laws of the universe in the Big Bang Theory in the first, like, whatever nanosecond or whatever, like, presumed to not be uniform. Like, that needs to be just assumed. And I forget who says this, but yeah, William Lane Craig points this out. That's not I mean, that stipulated as not being empirically verifiable. So yeah, there are these like conceptual like bridges that they have to help themselves to, which on a brute empirical model shouldn't be allowed.
We're quite comfortable with the idea that in principle there's no conflict between the Bible and science, because that's what the church teaches. But if you're talking to some Protestants, they can get quite edgy and nervous about this. So my position is that it could be true that our bodies just arose via evolution, and I'm happy to accept that if the scientific evidence was a lot better than it currently is. So based on the limitations that we've got, I don't think that actually happened. I would accept it if it was better evidence, but I don't think it's good enough yet. The fossil record is not good enough for me. I know many people agree with that view, but you get people saying things like, but the Bible says it was all created in 6 days. How can you say that's consistent with it being over a long period of time? And questions like that really bother them. Where do you think this arises from? And have you noticed it in your own conversations, Elliot? Do you get people saying things like, but what about the flood or various other aspects of the Old Testament?
I think it's the same kind of thinking as scientism, right? Where you're not willing to look beyond what is right in front of your eyes. And that's, of course, one of the biggest errors of Protestantism is that you're going to look at it and with your limited point of view, you're going to make your own conclusion. And that obviously will lead us to where we are in this conversation with science, but now with religion, and it makes Christianity look stupid. And that's why we need the church.
Yeah.
That's why we need sacred tradition. That's why we need those who know how to decipher these things, like the scientists that are willing to go deeper than what's in front of their eyes.
Yeah, that's a big problem, definitely, Tim.
Well, yeah, like I love what Eliot said there. The tradition, including patristics like St. Augustine, who said, yeah, well, we have the 7 days account of creation, but you might not have heard we also have the Adam and Eve account of creation. And there are ostensible contradictions. Now, that doesn't mean that the flood didn't happen or that it's not historical. I believe it is, but there has always been an anagogical interpretation of the two creation myths. And the Pontifical Biblical Commission has given us 5 properties that must be believed to be a solid Catholic in good standing, that are consistent with the patristics on the two creation myths, which do, I'm sorry, Protestants, and strangely enough, the last 10 years, Catholics who have onboarded such sola scriptura Protestantism. But here's what you have to believe. There was a first woman and a first man, who most of it's anagogical stuff, it's moral theological stuff, who through free will, which they possessed, chose to sin, a sin which they elected and which created the need for a redeemer, Christ, Jesus. And these are the 4 things, I might be missing one of them, that the Pontifical Biblical Commission, I know people will say it's modernist, no, in concomitance with guys like Jerome and Augustine and Aquinas, say these are the things that you need to understand about Genesis 1, 2, and 3. These are the precepts that you must hold. I simply, fellas, I don't understand in the last 10 years, outside of the false thoroughness of internet learning and internet teaching. I think that's what's accountable for most of it. The rush, the enthusiasm by Roman Catholics, who are the beneficiaries of, like Eliot said, magisterium and tradition, and were the beneficiaries of a great Aristo-Thomist scientific tradition, which affirms the ability to have Big Bang. I don't understand the rush to become, in the strict sense of the term, creationist, sola fide, sola scriptura Calvinist. It does perplex me, and I've said this lots. It's not necessary, and it makes us look very, very silly. Pius XII wrote Humani Generis, and he says, as long as basically those conditions I just enumerated are met, the Bible does not contradict science. The Bible will never contradict science. It just wasn't trying to speak scientifically. We can accept some theistic evolutionary model if it eventually presents itself. Pius XII said it hasn't necessarily been proven yet, but it doesn't really matter to us whether the universe is very old or whether it's very young, the way creation myth A says. So I don't understand the rush by Catholics who have the full truth to Protestantize themselves and to christen themselves in the waters of sola fide and sola scriptura. It makes no sense to me.
Mike, any thoughts on that? And has your thinking changed on it at all over the last few years?
Yeah. I guess really the only thing to add would be, what you have the Hebrew word yom for day, so there's obviously the conceptual issue of if God makes the sun on the 3rd day, and a constitutive feature of being a day is the sun going around the earth. How could that conceptually make sense? And then likewise with Tim's point about there are 2 creation stories. One which has Adam and Eve being made in the 6th day, and then the second starts over, and we have the second creation story just focusing on Adam and Eve. How is it possible that temporally those things can both make sense, right? So that alone, I think, should in conjunction with tradition, what the church fathers have said, that gives some interpretive latitude for it not being a scientifically precise claim, as it were, if we were talking about the specific weight of gold or something. Second of all, and I credit Hugh Owen with this, is that Hugh Owen makes the point as that this is supposed to be and understood as it's revelation, it's divine revelation knowledge. It's not it's not within the category of empirical things that we could know. In the same way that if you had a computer and you looked at the software and you looked at the structure of the software, there's nothing intrinsic to that could ever tell you about how the computer got to you. What was the origin of that, the wiring of the computer. Like, you would need the designer, the creator, to tell you what the backstory is as to how it is that he made that computer. You can obviously understand like the designer's intelligibility and something about the designer's thinking by looking at the laws and intelligibility of the program that we're in, so to speak. But getting outside of that program is not going to be something that you're going to be able to apprehend from looking at the program itself. You need the creator, the programmer, to say this is how it all kicked off. So Owen makes the distinction, and he's this I think is his language, but I don't think he's going sola scriptura. I think he's just reiterating what the early patristics said. Is that there's the order of creation and then the order of providence. So the order of creation, it's going to be different in kind from the order of providence. So what the order of providence is concerning is the everything from the fall onward, not prior to that, right? So that seems to be like the proper space where we can be talking about these types of issues. But like the testimony of God and revealed knowledge, it's just going to be different in kind from the things that we can talk about within the empirically apprehendable world. And I think that for me was like a helpful distinction. What the flat-footed sort of Protestant view is just to blend all those things together and say that the order of providence and the order of revelation, it's on the same plane and in the same category of empirical apprehension that you would find within science. And then you get people like Ken Ham or whatever or like Kirk Cameron trying to like mash those two areas of knowledge together. And I don't think it's not needed. There's just two different categories of knowledge.
I've got a comment from Cardinal Bellarmine on the Galileo controversy that you reminded me of there. He said, writing to one of Galileo's friends, if there were a real proof that the sun is in the center of the universe and the sun does not go around the earth, but the earth round the sun, then we should have to proceed with great circumspection in explaining passages of scripture which appear to teach the contrary, and rather admit that we did not understand them than declare an opinion to be false which is proved to be true. But as for myself, I shall not believe that there are such proofs until they are shown to me. So there wasn't a real proof, as he's talking about there, in Galileo's time or his time. Galileo thought he had those proofs, but he didn't actually have them. His proofs were wrong, and that was the point of principle at stake. But you can see Bellarmine is willing to say, look, if science has discovered X about the world, then in principle, scripture can't contradict it. And we're going to have to be more careful about how we interpret it, because all truth is ultimately one, and any kind of empirical or scientific truth has the same source as all religious truth in God, truth with a capital T himself. So it's an important point to make, Tim.
Yeah. Copernicus had shown heliocentrism 70 years before this clown Galileo started onboarding Copernicanism and making explicit theological claims about it. That's what got him in trouble. People don't understand this. Copernicus dedicated the revolutions of the heavenly bodies to Pope Paul III. He was homies with the Pope. So when he was positing heliocentrism, Copernicanism, he got in no trouble. Why was that? Because Copernicus, unlike clown semi-plagiarist Galileo 6 or 7 decades later, wasn't saying that this new scientific discovery upset the whole natural, theological, and teleological order. You see the difference, people? I get asked about Galileo so much, and it's like, Copernicanism was fine with the church. It was always fine with the church. The church was like, wait and see. Like I'm saying about Big Bang. And the funny thing about really Protestants today with Big Bang, but a lot of Catholics that are taking on board a lot of the really, really specious Protestant assumptions about Big Bang is it accomplished two things, right? It accomplished establishing a discrete beginning in time, a creation ex nihilo, which is Stalin even references the fact that this is a proof of creation ex nihilo, which is a Catholic concept for 1600 years prior. They like that. But then it makes that establishment in specific terms, which you always have to make an establishment of fact in specific terms. They don't like the 13.7 billion year lifespan that the establishment comes with. It comes with that freight. And so the Protestant game, and to some extent more recently, internet Catholics who are onboarding that kind of young earth creationism, have attempted, without knowing any of the science, without knowing any of the philosophy of creation ex nihilo, have attempted to just say, well, we like that, yes, the universe does have a discrete beginning in time. Einstein was thwarted in the 1920s when he thought he was so close to establishing an infinite universe and was publishing on it. Oh, the fudge factor screwed him up. And who did this? This was Catholic priest, Monsignor Lemaitre. So we'll take that. But we don't want to, we'll deny explicitly that Lemaitre thought he could prove, and has been vindicated in many ways, the universe is, 13.7, 13.8 billion years old. You can't do that. And yet, and it makes us look very, very silly. It's no better than what the Soviets attempted to do when they wanted to reject Gregor Mendel's Mendelian genetics, but they borrowed some of the premises from it, and they had a competing claim of Lysenkoism, which ended up causing like the potato blight, like millions of people starved because they stuck with their bad science. You can't stick with the false conclusion that is crafted by you, whether you're a Christian or a Marxist, and just borrow premises where convenient. You're always going to have a ideological potato blight. You're always going to end up starving people when you don't follow premises to conclusions.
Yeah, that's a really powerful point. So we're not afraid of whatever the results of scientific discovery might be, because all truth is one, and we know that scripture in principle is going to be consistent with them. That's what I try to get across to people who have got anxieties about it, because kept in its proper sphere, science isn't making those kind of theological claims. That's why if you look at the Catechism of the Council of Trent, for example, it's not really saying anything at all about natural phenomena. The church isn't interested in that, but it is going to say things like the human soul is created individually at the moment of conception by God and is immaterial, and therefore any purely materialistic theory of evolution is wrong. But yeah, who knows? Maybe the body was produced that way, and that's fine. When people start saying the fact that the body was produced that way means that the whole of Christianity is false, that's just absurd. That shows they don't understand the issues at stake whatsoever. But so many people are in that position, and I hope today's podcast has helped them to see that they needn't be. And I was really lucky looking back to when I found this book at that time in my life. Dr. Stephen Barr's Modern Physics and Ancient Faith is the one I'd recommend to people who want to get a really succinct and accurate overview of all of this. We've touched on some of the big points he makes today, but he gives a rundown of 5 scientific discoveries that basically weren't what the materialists were expecting, but they were what the religious worldview was expecting. First was Big Bang and how it was resisted. They didn't like the sound of that, but it was what people who were inspired by what the Bible and the church said expected to see. So there is a temporal beginning. The next is the fact that the universe is governed by mathematical laws that have an intricate and subtle structure based on deep mathematical ideas. And he says that matter itself is based on ideas, suggests that the material world is the product of a mind. So not only that the universe has physical laws, but that they have this intricacy, subtlety, beauty. Why should that be the case on the materialist worldview?
Hylomorphism. That's why.
Yeah. And then we've got the anthropic coincidences. So atheist materialists will say that science says the whole universe is pointless, but everything about it seems to come to a point in human beings. Basically, everything is just so that life can be produced. Next one, Tim's mentioned this already, but at one point it was thought that the laws of physics were deterministic, but quantum mechanics completely overthrew that in the 1920s and then left room for free will. And it's important to say that it doesn't somehow create free will, but it does leave room for it. So that was what they weren't expecting, but people who believed in free will weren't surprised by. And then quantum mechanics again, we've got anti-materialist arguments based on the logical structure of quantum mechanics and the role that observers play in it. So for all 5 reasons, science is in fact more compatible with the religious worldview than the materialist one. And the real kicker for me was that the materialists will just deny their own rationality rather than accept the results of science. And that to me was the irrational dogmatism that they were accusing the religious of, but actually showing it themselves far more obviously.
Add to that list 6 and 7, people out there listening. There's nothing more anthropic than the 20-year-old discovery of the cosmic microwave background radiation. Just Google that, cosmic microwave background radiation, CMBR. It proves that human beings are, as Genesis says, actually at the temporospatial center of the universe. It's unfreaking believable, and it made several atheist scientists who discovered it into Christians. So CMBR, Google that as number 6. And then number 7, I mentioned it several times. Mendelian genetics is far more profound than Christians believe. He's another Christian priest positor of a theory. It proves why why human beings are so naturally tied to their family, and why we don't really care about the state, or why we don't really care about folks who are not related to us, except in some abstract Christian way. And the left has opposed these ideas, all 7 of the ones, if you take them all together, vigorously.
Brilliant. Well, we got even more than the 5 points that I was coming in with. We've got full 7 there. And the book, for people who are interested, Stephen Barr, Modern Physics and Ancient Faith, definitely one I'd recommend. But also just go into the Catholic Encyclopedia and just have a look at the entries for science, evolution, etc. You'll learn a lot there too. All right, guys, excellent. Thanks a lot. Good to see you. And then see you next week too. Take care.
Peace.
Thanks, fellas. Have a good one.